Hi everyone, welcome again to another weekly lesson. And in this week, we're going to go through some information about the Scottish national poet, Robert Burns. And we're doing that because in Scotland and around the world, this weekend, actually, I think yesterday, Saturday, the 25th, was his birthday. And that means that people are celebrating Burns Night. Now, you might ask yourself, why is this a big celebration outside of the UK? And that's because of the number of people who've immigrated to other countries throughout the years. As you can imagine, America sees this day as very special. And if you're wondering who Robert Burns is, he's the man who wrote Auld Lang Syne. That's the song that's sang all across the English-speaking world at midnight on New Year's Eve, just as New Year's Day is beginning. So I want you to come with me, and we're going to journey through this night, which is all about Robert Burns. And as you would expect, it's an evening with a lot of alcohol. I mean, it's not like British people need a reason to drink alcohol, but Robert Burns is one evening where people, particularly Scottish people, get very, very drunk. Right, let's see then. Let's go and have a look at the screen and the news story, which is all about Robert Burns. Right, here we are. We're on the BBC News website. And it says here, Burns Night. Who was Robert Burns? And why do we celebrate his work? Now, poetry really isn't a big thing here in the UK. And in fact, I think more and more people now don't really appreciate reading poetry, the arts, books. It's something which is left to older people. Here in the UK, the educated ones, the really educated ones, leave because we don't like the culture around the UK, which is becoming more and more distasteful. So many people are leaving the UK and taking with them some experience. I don't have the figures on emigration, but I can tell you that there are many people who live in other countries, and when they move, they take with them the traditions of reading Robert Burns' poetry, for example. It's very common for Scottish people to carry a book of Robert Burns' poetry with them wherever they go. I don't know why, really. I don't particularly like his poetry, but poetry here isn't really a big thing anymore. But people do still get very drunk on the evening and eat a special dinner. So we're going to look at that. Right, here we are. So, Burns Night is celebrated every year on the 25th of January in honour of Scotland's national poet, Robert Burns. The Ayrshire poet and lyricist died in 1796 at the age of 37, but he is still regarded as the most prominent poet to have written in the Scots dialect. Now, let me just tell you that because he's written in the Scots dialects, because he chose to write that way, his poems are very hard to read, even for us. It's like England has Shakespeare, Scotland has the Scottish dialect. So if you are going to read the poems of Robert Burns, you'll need to find ones which are written in plain English. That's really really important. It says here his most well-known poems include To a Mouse, addressed to a haggis, Tam O'Shanter, A Red, Red Rose, and the Selkirk Grace. It continues alongside his literary contributions. Burns gained fame for his numerous love affairs and radical political leanings, expressing sympathy for the French and American revolutions. I think one of the reasons why Burns was so popular is because he was considered to be a working man. He was the normal man. He didn't come from an aristocratic background. He was a farmer. The critics of him just refer to him as being a drunk, because I think everyone agrees that he enjoyed his alcohol. What is Burns Night? And there's a picture there of haggis, turnips, potatoes, and some vegetables. So in the Scottish dialect, this is haggis, tatties, and neeps. And that, as you can see there, is a traditional Burns supper of haggis, neeps, and tatties. And if you try to say that outside of Scotland, people aren't going to understand. But within Scotland, it's a fairly common dish, not only on the 25th of December. It says here, Burns Night, or the Burns Supper, is traditionally celebrated with a dinner consisting of haggis, neeps, and tatties, more commonly known as turnips and potatoes. On the 21st of July, 1801, the 5th anniversary of his death, his friends gathered at what is now called Burns Cottage in Alloway near Ayr, where he was born, to honour his memory. So that's on his date of death. So he was actually born on the 25th of January. During the gathering, they read aloud some of his works and poetry. One poem addressed to a haggis was recited as they dined on haggis and a sheep's head. To dine on something is to eat it. Okay, to dine, the noun is dinner. Okay, so they dined, they ate haggis and a sheep's head. Oh, disgusting. Anyway, unbeknown to them, that just means that they didn't know, this event marked the beginning of a tradition that has endured for 200 years and continues to be celebrated today. In the years following, Burns clubs started to emerge across Scotland to celebrate his life, and they still exist all across the world. There could be one near you. Burns, a Burns club. Okay, so when is Burns Night? And you can see a picture of one of his poems there. This is a typical example of the Scottish dialects. So I'll read what it says here in the Scottish dialects, and then I'll read it in English. The Selkirk Grace. Some hae meat canna eat, and some would eat that want it. But we hae meat, and we can eat. And say the Lord be thanked. Okay, so what that's saying there is some have meat and can't eat, and some would eat if they wanted it, but we have meat and we can eat. And so to God we should be thankful. That's what it's saying there. Now, I have to say, many people in England would just imagine that this man is a crazy man writing in the Scottish dialect, because the Scottish dialect is not understood anywhere outside of Scotland. But thankfully, much of his poetry is now available in plain English. And many people learn the Scottish dialect just so they can read it, in the same way as you might learn a Shakespeare play in its original language, just to improve your knowledge of English. It says here, in 1802, the celebration was shifted from the date of Burns' death to his birth date. However, they initially got the date wrong, meeting 4 days after his actual birth. It wasn't until the following year, in 1803, when members of what is known as the Mother Club, the Greenock Barns Club, discovered through Ayr parish records that his true birth date was 25th of January. This date has been celebrated with Burns suppers for more than 200 years. And you can see there a picture of the house where he was born. Now, I was taken to that house many times by my grandparents. They loved Burns because Burns is a symbol of Scottish culture. It's a symbol of Scottish life. It's a symbol of hard work, and Burns is a great icon of Scotland. And that house is now a museum. Now, I remember when I was a boy, these Burns suppers, they were only available to men, and they were invite only. You were considered very fortunate if a Burns club invited you. And if you weren't invited, it was kind of a snub. It means that you weren't good enough or you didn't have the right friends. My grandfather, he waited a few years, always hoping to be invited to a Burns supper. And eventually he was. Towards the end of his life, he managed to go to Burns suppers, where he used to get really, really drunk. And my grandmother used to get really angry at him. And I remember one year he got so drunk that he was staggering around their house, and he just went to the bath and lay in it, fully clothed, until the next day. And my grandmother was so angry at him, she left him there. She said that she was almost going to turn on the water in the bath to give him a shock, but she didn't. She just left him alone, and he slept there for the whole night. They are very well organized, and these days they allow women. It's a ceremony very closely associated with Freemasonry, because Robert Burns was indeed a Freemason. So historically, it was a very Protestant affair. But these days, of course, anyone can go. You just pay a ticket and you can go. Although some of them are probably still quite strict. Right, where was Robert Burns born? Burns started life in Alloway, South Ayrshire, in 1759, the eldest of 7 children born to William Burns and Agnes Brown, Brun in Scotland, from a relatively poor farming family. He began working in the fields at a young age, and by 15 he had become the primary labourer. His farming upbringing is why he's often referred to as the ploughman's poet, the plumen's poet in Scottish. His father, a self-educated man, decided to homeschool his children with the help of tutors. It was during these formative years that Burns made his initial attempts at writing poetry for various friends and in pursuit of women. As he matured, he had a growing interest in poetry, nature, women, and drinking, rather than farm work, much to his father's dismay. So he's just like a typical British man, then, isn't he? And there he is. There's a statue of him in the town he was born. It's really strange. It's this big statue, which clearly it was designed by Freemasons, so the architecture on the thing has all these dimensions and strange mathematical measurements. I'm sure of that. Right, Burns was known to have had many affairs throughout his life. An affair is, when you have a romantic endeavour with people that you're not married to. In 1785, his affair with a servant girl named Elizabeth Peyton resulted in an illegitimate child. Jean Armour, a woman who became a constant presence in his life, became pregnant the following year. Burns sought permission to marry her, but Jean's father refused. Annoyed by this, Burns planned to travel to Jamaica, it was a colony back then, with another woman named Mary Campbell, but she tragically died shortly after. She is more commonly known today as Highland Mary. And after Mary's death, Burns still attempted to gather funds to leave for Jamaica. However, in 1786, he published his first collection of poetry titled Poems, chiefly in the Scottish dialects. Yeah, I remember when my parents moved to England when I was a very young boy, someone gifted me with that book, or a copy of that book, which is still widely available today. These poems garnered, interesting word, rapid success. It just means made rapid success for him, making him known across Scotland. He postponed his intended trip to Jamaica. Where did he live? Yeah, this is his house there in Dumfries, which is probably his last residence, I would imagine. Yeah, that's it there. An Edinburgh edition of poems, chiefly in the Scottish dialect, brought more fame, money, and an entrance into polite society. He was received as an equal by the city's men of letters and was a guest at the aristocratic gatherings. In 1788, Burns moved to Dumfries, where he leased a farm, rented a farm, and then he married Jean Armour. But the poet was leading a double life. That means that he wasn't completely honest with people. He engaged in correspondence and produced poems and songs with individuals who were considered socially superior, all the while working as a tenant, farmer, and an exciseman. Okay, his outspoken support for the French Revolution nearly cost him his job, as he openly expressed his pro-revolutionary views. He died in 1796 after his health had rapidly declined. It just goes on to say he had a son, Maxwell, 12 children, 5 survived, it says here. Yeah. And Jean Armour lived for many years, and she was buried with him. The impact of Robert Burns today, well, there's a picture of people singing Auld Lang Syne, presumably at New Year. I don't know where that is, but it doesn't look local. It says here, his life is remembered and celebrated worldwide, as his work inspired generations of romantic poets such as Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. His musical compositions have become integral to traditions worldwide. Yeah, if you want to hear his poems, listen to the songs. And they're not his musical compositions. He wasn't a musical man. Music was added long after his death, yes. But the songs are beautiful. My Love is Like a Red, Red Rose is one of my favourites. Auld Lang Syne, which Burns based on an older Scottish folk song, there's a big argument that that might actually be German, is traditionally sung to bid farewell to the old year at the stroke of midnight on Hogmanay, that's New Year's Eve. The melody of Auld Lang Syne is played worldwide at various events, each carrying different cultural significance. In Japan, for instance, its melody is played in bars and department stores to signal closing time. I didn't know that. That's funny. But as you can imagine, in America, this is a big, big thing, and they call him Robbie Burns rather than Rabbi. And many people in America are descended from Scots, so he's considered a person from home, a national hero. And that's it. So lots of new words there. I'm afraid I've not been very successful in doing shorts for all of the words in last week's lesson, but I will do more podcasts if I can't do shorts in the coming week, just to go over some of these. That's it from me. I wish you all a wonderful, wonderful week. I'll be back soon with more podcasts. Bye.